Welcome to the final episode of the Organ Podcast from the Royal College of Organists with me, Mark O'Brien. Coming up, I talk to Gordon Stewart about the path the organ has taken him on in a career spanning 50 years of recitals, conducting, broadcasting, town halls, Bach and religion.
In the performance, the only people who matter are the audience. This is all geared towards them. And if it's not, then do it in private in your own church. Don't pretend that that's performing. Performing is bringing this music and laying it out to those people. That's what I try to do.
But first, I'm standing outside the Odeon cinema in Leicester Square, right in the heart of London's West End. This building really is a beacon of the golden age of cinema, with generations of Hollywood stars and royalty passing through the doors right behind me for gala evenings and premieres. But I've not come here to watch a movie, because I'm about to go inside and meet perhaps the most enduring star of them all, affectionately known as the Duchess. She's a 5-manual Compton organ that has been entertaining audiences in this building since 1937. And the man who's been the organist here at the Odeon for over 30 years is none other than Donald MacKenzie, one of Europe's finest theatre organists and master of silent film accompaniment. Well, Donald, we're in the main auditorium. We're right in front of the screen. And the luxury here is astonishing. You can still see the legacy of the 30s, the heyday when this cinema was built. But I'm looking at a large screen, a small black stage, no organ.
No, you would think it doesn't exist. But if magically we push this button...
You've got a button to hand.
We've got a button to hand.
Donald, push the button.
Hey presto, the orchestra pit.
Gosh, the whole stage is going down.
Yes, it's an orchestra lift.
So even then you would have had orchestras accompanying films.
Well, this cinema was built 1937. In fact, 2nd of November it was opened. So it was very much a creation of the talkies. There have been occasional silent films here, but not with orchestras. Orchestras were used mainly here for gala premiere nights, royal premieres, when there would be a band in the orchestra pit with the organ as well in the 50s and 60s.
But astonishingly, in 2024, you are the orchestra, your instrument. I still can't see it, though. The stage has gone down.
There's another button.
There's just a big hole. Where is the...
There's another button that says up. So there's 2 trapdoors falling away.
But I mean, we're looking down into it's a cavernous pit. Hang on, let's walk to the middle of the... I've got to be careful I don't fall off.
Don't fall in.
No, that would ruin the show. Oh, my goodness. Now
there's the console.
We're now standing above the console.
And then its lifting mechanism is down another floor. So 1, 2, 3 floors below us. You can hear the Northern Line platform announcements coming down the tunnel from Leicester
Really?
Square down there. Yes.
Well, gosh, I mean, it's so deep, you're probably quite near it. Right, so now we have to go down. How do we get to the organ? It's still in a pit. There's another button. Where are you going? We're now walking into the middle of the... We're sort of in row. What am I doing?
Have a seat.
You're asking me to sit in, so I'm
Yes.
about 4 rows back. Why am I sitting in 4 rows back?
I'll go do some magic.
Okay, well, I must say, this cinema's very posh. It's looking like... I feel like I'm in business class at British Airways. I mean, there's a lovely padded recliner. I've got a fold-away table with a cup holder here. And Donald has just disappeared. I'm now in the cinema on my own. No organ, no Donald. Something's happening. I think something started. There he is, rising up out of the darkness of that orchestra pit, in the driving seat of this extraordinary instrument, now coming up into full view in front of the big screen. Well, that's what I call making an entrance. Beautifully illuminated. I mean, I've seen some organ consoles in my time, but nothing compared to this. I mean, this is extraordinary. It looks to me like the whole thing is made out of glass because it's just illuminating. It's got light coming from inside it.
Well, this was part of the joy of cinema organs. We always say it improves the sound. The fact they've got these wonderful, what were known as jelly mould glass surrounds. And this one is unique. It was built specially to mirror the internal decor of the original cinema 1937.
And you've got these beautiful Art Deco curves
Yes.
that are changing colour as we speak, because a minute ago it was sort of blue, it's now sort of orange, it's going a sort of a deep red. And I notice even your organ bench, I mean, this is something to
Yes.
behold, is changing colour. I mean, you're lit from all angles here.
Known as the hot seat.
But the thing about this, I mean, it looks stunning, and we're in this extraordinary cinema. This is quite rare, and this is a Compton organ. Apart from the beautiful illuminated case, I'm also looking at 5 manuals. This must be significant in the world of cinema organs.
Well, it was the only 5 manual cinema organ built in the heyday. And I understand the story goes that Oscar Deutsch, who was the head of Odeon, in fact, Odeon is supposed to stand for Oscar Deutsch Entertains Our Nation. He wanted the largest cinema organ in a British cinema and didn't want to pay extra for it, so Compton said, I'll give you a 5th manual. And in fact, it doesn't have any working stops of its own. It's a couple of manuals, so you can pull up the other manuals, the great, the solo and the orchestral manual to it at various pitches, and it's really there for display.
But this is rare. I mean, the thing about organs like this, there are only a handful of cinema organs still in the cinema, working as cinema organs in the country. I mean, in the heyday, there would have been hundreds of things like this.
Yes, and indeed in this area of Leicester Square, there was probably 10 or more just in the immediate Leicester Square area. There was one in the little Cameo cinema down the back of this theatre. There was the Warner had an organ, the Empire had a big Wurlitzer, the Leicester Square Theatre, now demolished, that was a small Wurlitzer, and then there was 3 or 4 in the Haymarket in Piccadilly and Regent Street, and further up Regent Street more.
I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, just that many organs in such a small, less than a square mile, and the rest of the country. I mean, local cinemas probably in the rest of the UK would have had an organ of some sort of another accompanying the films.
Yes, by the 1930s they were instruments of entertainment. There were solo instruments in their own right, and they were part of the Cine Variety programme. So people went to the cinema, they would have had the organ prelude, play-in, whatever you call it. The organist would be playing part of the show. Then there would be the first feature. Then there would be the intermission, and the organist would play again, possibly even a slide interlude where words of songs came on the screen, and there'd be some sort of story about the whole music that was being played on the organ. That would last about 15 minutes. And then the next feature film, the second feature, and there was a newsreel as well and all of that.
Gosh. So, I mean, this is a major feature for the organ. I mean, this is a major entertainment resource. And we were talking the 20s, the 30s and the 40s.
Yes. Most big cinemas had 2 organists in the heyday. So there was a solo organist who did the solo spots, an orchestral organist who would either play along with the orchestra. And for the longer films, you would have the orchestra would break, after an hour. And the organist would start playing. So the organ would come in under the orchestra would drop out, and the organist would carry on for a while.
I mean, you can't imagine that now. I mean, what's astonishing, you are probably quite rare in the sense that you're the house organist here at the Odeon Leicester Square. You still are a real-life cinema organist with a cinema organ in very much a functioning cinema in the West End of London.
Yes, that's quite phenomenal, really, I think, in this day and age. And I'm very fortunate to have such a lovely instrument and a great building to perform in.
But what do you do as the house organist, if I can call you that, the resident organist? I mean, you've been here for well over 30 years playing this organ. What do you do? What is the role of a cinema organist in 2024?
Well, before COVID, we were playing the organ every weekend, so it was on Fridays and Saturdays, and I was providing, I'm going to call it popcorn music, just playing music as people came in. But of course, it's a wow factor for them, so it's a USP, a unique selling point that this can be shown to the public and played to the public. Then there's the glamorous premieres. I sometimes play music for those as people are taking their seats. And indeed, next week we've got the Royal Film performance, and I shall be here for that.
That's a routine event for you, I guess, being here.
Well, I've played in front of a few of the royal family in my time. But the thing about it, and my maxim has been that the music has to be of the best possible calibre for any event, because you don't know who's in the audience.
Well, let's talk about the music, because I guess really this organ and organs like it, really these are the original orchestral instruments. As you were saying earlier, they were playing with orchestras, and when you didn't have an orchestra, this would take the place of the orchestra. And looking around at the console here, you've got, I think there are somewhere over 200 stop tabs. I mean, it's a huge instrument. They're all in a semicircle, because I assume you've got to reach them very quickly. Are you thinking orchestrally? I mean, you've got your strings, you've got your woodwind, you've got your brass, and because it's a Compton cinema organ, I know you'll have plenty of percussion as well.
Absolutely. I mean, you think of it orchestrally, you think about what you're using, how you're using it, how an orchestral instrumentalist would play, and trying to adapt that to the organ. So the accompaniment manual, you've got some nice flutes, and you can have the strings with it, which gives a very nice left hand. Then on the grate, you can have some more flutes and strings, different ones at different pitches. The crumet's rather fun on this organ with the tremulant, and it gives this lovely sort of buzzy sound. Then there's a trumpet, which is lovely. There's the big tuba. And then the whole lot together give this...
Is this all the trumpet, all the brass together?
Yes, this is all the brass together.
With a cymbal crash at the
and
end.
a gong. So up on manual 3, the solo manual, we can mix the strings and the vox humana, and it gives you this lovely silveryness.
And that influences how you play as well, that sound.
The internal glissandi to mirror how swooping strings might go in an orchestra.
And what are some of the good solo stops? When you've got your strings, what's the perfect thing to really sit above that?
There's a lovely clarinet and a big orchestral flute here. As the solo stop, you can use it like this. The tibia goes in with them being the backbone, and that gives you it's the 8-foot tibia with the 4 and 2 in the sub-octave.
I mean, there's something really evocative about that. It does take you back to, I can imagine those 1940s films, the glamour there. And while you were playing it, I don't know if this just happens automatically, but the entire console went blue. It's sort of like the atmosphere of the actual organ console changed, all the lights within it.
I think our old Duchess is intuitive.
Now, that's what you call it, the Duchess.
Yes.
Where did that come from?
Well, I think it came way back to the 1930s, because people have said that it was always nicknamed the Duchess because there was a lot of Duchesses here on the opening night.
I mean, the thing about what I know about organs like this is that although I'm looking at, a couple of hundred stops, it's not like Liverpool Cathedral, is it? You've actually got quite a small organ behind all of this. Am I right? Is this 14 ranks?
It's 17.
Astonishingly small. I mean, in simple money, that's really 17 stops, which the cunning wiring of Compton have enabled it to be controlled through 200 stops. So lots of duplications, lots of pipes being able to play on different manuals at different times.
Yes, well, Compton was a master of unification, and that is what this organ is. It's a unit organ. And again, the thoughts behind how you play it, not having the same stops in the melody as you've got in the accompaniments as things break out, you have to think that through as an organist on one of these instruments. So you might find a different way of registering the organ so that you're not left with gaps and harmonies and things because notes are being played elsewhere.
Well, of course, this organ was built in 1937 when the cinema had sound. The old-fashioned silent movies, even in the 30s, were becoming a thing of the past. So this organ itself didn't really accompany the silent movies, but Compton, of course, John Compton, was a pioneer in building organs that did accompany silent movies, and I assume that character is still present in the instrument we're at today.
Yes, Compton built their first instruments were called kinestras, which was a kind of an amalgam of kinema with a K and estra being orchestra, so it's a cinema or kinema orchestra. And this organ has got a lot of effects. A glockenspiel.
Oh, that's lovely, isn't it?
A xylophone.
But I'm looking down, I'm just standing by your console. You've got extra tabs that are going down here. I'm looking at steamboat siren. Now, come on.
There we are.
That's a small steamboat siren.
Yes.
That's tin whistle.
Well,
fire bell. What's a fire bell?
It's a piece of plate metal being hit with a beater.
Now, come on.
Prepare to dive.
So what are these? How often do you use those?
Oh, occasionally.
But this must be back to silent movies, surely. This is when
Absolutely.
you are accompanying. Yes. Because isn't it weird that actually the organ is coming back in to accompanying silent movies in a way that it hasn't been doing for about 70 years?
Well, I think the Renaissance with organ, I've always, since the start of my career, I've always advocated silent films with organ accompaniment. Back in the 1990s, I'd say, I'd like to do a silent film. Oh, no, we don't want that. That's old hat. That was seen as old hat. And it isn't of today, but it's part of our heritage and part of where cinema came from, especially. And there's a rich plethora there of silent films. And I present a monthly event at the Musical Museum at Brentford with their Wurlitzer organ. They've got the old Regal Kingston organ, which again was an instrument of the Tockies, but every month we have a silent film there with organ accompaniment, which is marvellous because it's the only venue in the country that's promoting Wurlitzer and silent film.
Do they do silent films occasionally here at the Odeon for you to accompany?
We have done, and I'm hoping that they will return in 2025. So watch this space, as they say.
But it's fascinating because when you're doing those silent movies, as we all know, you're improvising. We know improvising is a skill that all organists try to have. But here you've got organs that are built for that. And yet, recently, we've got classical organists having a go at accompanying silent movies on church organs in churches. Do you think you have a different approach, or are you thinking, hang on a minute, they're taking my work? Because there must be a more integral approach to improvising a movie when you've grown up in this theatre world.
Yeah, I think there is certainly a difference in what I can offer. And I hope so, because we're all unique in our own way, and I hope I have what I have to bring to the table, and X will bring something to the table that's different to what I do. I think in an orchestral vein, I don't think in an organ improvisation way. I think Korngold, you get so many clues to how scores were in the days, because if you listen to those early sound films, you hear all these wonderful orchestrations and post-Straussian harmonies and use of leitmotifs and all that sort of thing, which is what I use.
And presumably on an organ like this, you can do it. So with all of those tremulants, with all of these 8
But I can do this on a cathedral organ as well.
But it's not going to sound the same, surely.
Well, it doesn't have the tremulants, but my job then is to take the theatre technique, the technique that I have, and transfer that successfully.
If you're talking Korngold or you're talking those post-Straussian things, you're creating drama, you're creating suspense, you're creating mood. I mean, how would you improvise, a love scene, for example? How would you get that character across on an organ like this?
So here's just an idea of a love scene, Rudolph Valentino picture. They're coming in for the big embrace. So you all right? Here goes. Scene change to something else.
But the point is, this is a natural musicianship. You're not reading from a score, you're not rehearsing, you're not practicing the notes, you're not practicing when you're going to put in a piston on, grade 3. No. This comes straight from you.
Yeah, I know the film. That's the important thing. It's to know what you're working with, so you know what's coming up on the screen, and to have in your brain the cue. But I've got photographic memory, so I can pull up the film as it's going along, and the brain said, this is coming, that's coming, be ready for that. And
because you've got to be actually on time. I mean, you have to be precise to the second. So presumably your eyes aren't on the keyboard. You've got to look at the screen.
Yes. There's no point if somebody falls downstairs, they fall downstairs, and then 2 seconds later you go on the organ or piano. You've missed it. There's no point of even thinking about it unless you do it at the time they go and be right on top of it. There is no point.
Play me somebody falling downstairs.
Well, that's just a and they call that Mickey Mousing in the States. There's 2 schools of silent film playing as well. There's one where you just play music to perfume the air, perhaps, and there's another one where you catch falls and stuff like that, and that's called Mickey Mousing. But that's more difficult to do because you have to be on top of it. Otherwise, as I say, just don't do it.
Give me a comic scene. How do you do, the car chase, quintessential car chase?
Oh, well, it depends on how maniacal it's going.
Let's go maniacal, and let's have klaxons, let's have trains crossing in front of the cars. Go for it.
You don't what much? Right, okay. Here's the train. people.
I'm just wondering, are there barriers or prejudices when you in the organ world, because you can do both, so you can go and do a Bach recital and you can also go and do a Buster Keaton film.
Yes.
Do you find, though, you might get typecast? Or...
I'm a cinema organist, yes.
Right.
Yes.
Now, you did that, you pulled your face and you did quote hands with your fingers.
Yes.
So explain. So there is a barrier, there is a...
There can be. I've got a lot of friends who are eminent classical organists who don't have that barrier, but I've met it, when I'm looked down the nose slightly.
And obviously you don't think that's justified, do you?
Well, I might have more letters than the person that's looking down their nose, but it doesn't matter. I'm still a cinema organist,
But that must annoy you, because again, the skill of being able to do this, to manage the instrument, to have these melodies up your sleeve, and to be spontaneous in a film is a skill. And subjectively, it might be more entertaining.
Yes, and they may look down their noses, but I get more in my audiences.
That's the point.
Yes, quite. I think the future will be film accompaniment.
Really?
I think so. I think people listening to 2 hours of organ music, is becoming less and less in the audience.
And why do you think that is? I mean, it seems like a full circle then for the organ, looking at the instrument where we are today.
Well, everything goes in peaks and troughs, I think, in life, and I think probably what will happen is that the silent film interest will trough, and then something else will come up, but hopefully I shall have retired by then.
But it must be quite cool in that case, being the organist of the Odeon, Leicester Square in London.
It's very nice. I mean, I never thought in 1993, when I walked in the front doors, that I'd still be here in 2024. But I must do something right, because I look after the instrument as curator. In essence, it's, apart from one or two tweaks here and there, it is the original instrument. It requires a lot of attention, and it gets it.
Well, do you have a signature tune of yours? When the movie's over, the curtains are drawing at the end of the film, do you have a signature tune that you play out with?
Yes, I discovered this back in the 1990s, a tune called Around the Corner at the Odeon.
Oh, very appropriate.
And it was written by a gentleman who worked in the music department at Boozy and Hawkes, and it was written for the Odeon company as a sort of signature tune, and there was a couple of dance band records made of it, and the words are, "You like pictures, I like pictures, what a great world it's going to be. We can walk out in the twilight and pretend Garbo's you and Clark Gable is me. Make a date, dear, don't be late, dear, for we know where the best show is on. Let's step out tonight where the stars are shining bright around the corner at the Odeon." Around the corner at the Odeon, and it goes like this.
Well, before you do it, I'll be your Garbo in that case. Donald MacKenzie, thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you very much indeed.
Cheers.
Gordon Stewart is the organist emeritus at Huddersfield Town Hall, where he was organist for well over 30 years. He's given recitals and masterclasses all over the world, taken part in several hundred television and radio broadcasts on the BBC, and has taught many of the country's leading organists and church musicians. And last year was awarded the British Empire Medal for services to music. Well, I went to meet Gordon at his home in Derbyshire, near the Peak District, to look back on an extraordinary 50-year performing career. So for the young Gordon Stewart, growing up in Dundee, am I right to say that the organ was actually an escape route for you?
I think that's absolutely true. I was the son of the manse. And obviously I'd heard organ every Sunday, really from birth, because I was taken to church straight away.
Your dad was the minister?
My dad was the minister. And it was interesting. My brother had piano lessons, and he was 5 years older than me. And I announced I wanted to have piano lessons. And in those days, you just got piano lessons at school. There were piano teachers in the state system. And so I had a wonderful piano teacher in those days, who was just ideal for a little boy who had no particular talent for doing this, but loved doing it and did tons of practice. And when I got to secondary school, on the staff there was a piano teacher called Kathleen Blackwood, who'd studied in London with Harold Craxton, and was a wonderful, wonderful teacher. And she believed in me and encouraged me enormously in pursuing a career in music. But she was strict. I look back on that now and think, you weren't allowed to play a Bach fugue, a Bach Prelude fugue, until you could analyse it. You literally had to go through it and point out how this thing was constructed. I don't think many piano teachers would do that nowadays at that stage. But she was wonderful. I loved her to bits, and I practised a huge amount. When I got to 14 and my legs were long enough, I asked if I could have organ lessons. And that was with Ian Bennett at the parish church. And he was a very strict teacher. You worked your way through things like John Stainer's The Organ, and everything had to be perfect. And he thought that I should go on and take organ further, and that I should go and study somewhere where there would be organists. There'd be lots of students, there'd be lots of organs, and there'd be lots of opportunities. And he didn't see that as Glasgow, which is where most people went to study music from my school. So I decided that I would go to Manchester, because I'd found London a bit frightening when I was there and thought Manchester might be an in-between. And I arrived in Manchester and met Eric Chadwick. And it was just the meeting of two musicians who saw things in the same way.
But this must have had a profound effect, because from what you're saying, son of the manse, very strict piano teacher defined by her strictness, then a very strict organ teacher defined by his strictness. Your musical introduction seems to be through the lens of being strict. I mean, I wonder, well, what enjoyment did you get from all of this? It must have been paradise when you did cross the border then. The organ took you out of that and you discovered Manchester and a whole new way of performing, of playing.
Yeah, I don't remember. Those were different days, Mark. I don't remember thinking, oh, this is all very strict. I remember thinking that if you're going to make something of it, you're going to have to work in the way that these people tell you you have to.
But was it good? I mean, are you grateful for that now?
Incredibly
Looking back,
grateful.
Is strictness the key?
Well, I think that kind of self-discipline is that you can. I mean, it's a very weird thing to do. I mean, all musicians, particularly organists, I mean, if you play the violin, as soon as you're able to play a bit, you're playing in an orchestra. When you play the organ, you're by yourself and you sit in a church. I used to spend Saturdays in church. I was appointed organist of Dundee Methodist Church when I was 15. And I just spent the whole weekend there, practising and playing all sorts of repertoire. Absolutely loving it, finding all sorts of sounds.
But did you have an idea then? So while you were still in Dundee and then when you were making that move to Manchester, did you have an idea of what you were going to do with the organ and where you were going to play it?
No, I had no idea at all. I just knew that I enjoyed it when I was doing this. And if there was some way that I thought I'd be a music teacher in a school somewhere and play the organ at weekends. That's what I thought would happen. And I mean, that nearly did happen. I was appointed head of music in a grammar school at one point, but didn't go. So no, there was no career plan in that sense. And things came along just at the right time, if I'm honest. I worked hard when I was at college. And
this is Manchester, the Royal Manchester.
At the Royal Manchester, which became the Royal Northern while I was there and moved into the new building. I was the first person to play on the new organ in the concert hall there. I played the Poulenc Concerto. And during that time, Lionel Rogg came from Geneva to do a masterclass. And Eric Chadwick, my teacher, said to him, that boy who played the Passacaglia would like to study abroad, but doesn't quite know where to go. And Rog said that he was just building up his international class, and if I could find the money to go, then he would have me in his class at the Geneva Conservatoire. And because I was Scottish, I was able to apply for a Sir James Caird travelling scholarship, and I got it for 3 years. I was supported by the Sir James Caird Travelling Scholarship Fund. I also won a scholarship from the Scottish Educational Foundation, and when I got to Geneva, I did an exam and was offered a scholarship at the Geneva Conservatoire, never paid any fees.
So the whole thing was free?
Yes.
Really?
And then I was appointed organist of the American Church in Geneva, which paid me a salary, and I just had a wonderful time. I mean, Rog was even more demanding than those other teachers.
So really, the Presbyterian stuff was training for Rog,
if
basically.
you did not practice 6 hours a day,
Wow.
you did not survive. And I used to go to the American church, and I did 3 hours in the morning, had a break, and did 3 hours in the afternoon every day. And you would go to your lesson, and you would have, the main work that you'd practiced would be some Bach Prelude and Fugue or some Reger or something. And Rog would say, "Oh, no, the last student played Bach. Play something else." And you had to have a whole repertoire ready for every lesson. And he came up with a list of pieces he wanted me to learn in my first year there. And to his amazement, I'd learned them all by the end of January. I mean, that's starting in September, not starting in January. And we had to think of all the other things I would do. But that included all 6 trio sonatas and things. It was hard work.
But you obviously loved it, because obviously even at that age, you're not there to have a good time as a student. You were clearly driven, and you were clearly good in that case, because you completed the course in sort of half the normal time.
Well, normally you would do 2 years in perfectionnement, 2 years in virtuosity. But if you work hard, you can do 1 year in each. The final exams were pretty scary, and Rog did say, if you get through this, nothing will ever frighten you again, because...
Was he right?
No.
Okay.
No, live broadcasting on BBC was always much more frightening to me than anything else. But those were good days, and I was the first British student to win a first prize in organ from the Geneva Conservatoire. I also won the Prix Otto Barbelon for getting the top marks. So I was, it was a great time. But I came back to Britain and I was unemployed.
And now, so at that point, did you have an idea? I mean, I would assume this is the concert platform was always beckoning with a teacher like that and that experience.
And I'd done so many concerts while I was there, and it was terrific. But when I got back to the UK, I didn't know what I was going to do. And in fact, not many people know this, but I actually did a year of teacher training in case nothing came of it, just so that I would have a safety net to make a living.
So what caught you? Instead of going into education, what was the main step?
Well, the organist who was at Bowden Parish Church left, and I took that on.
And Bowden, this is a small town sort of south of Manchester.
Yeah. And we had a really big choir and very young choir, but really enthusiastic. And, Mark, those were different days. There was no Sunday shopping. There was no Sunday sport. There were no computer games. There were no smartphones. Those were days when you could just have 20 boys singing 2 services on a Sunday, week after week. Nobody thought anything of it. It was just, those were great days. Well, having done that, when they were then looking for a new organist for Manchester Cathedral, and they had a choir master who was not an organist, who was running the main choir, they wanted somebody to build up the voluntary choir who sang on Sunday nights, which had been allowed to go down to very small numbers indeed. I think there were 5 boys, no altos, 1 tenor and 4 basses. And within 18 months, we had 26 boys and 18 men, and we were on tour in Switzerland. And those boys included some of the organists who are really well known now. Matthew Owens was in that choir, Dan Moult was in that choir, Mark Williams, Greg Morris. They all came through that choir, either as boys or as teenagers.
But this is a sudden change for you, because here you are coming out of the conservatory in Geneva. This is another big characteristic of you, which is choral conducting, because you are just as well known as conducting things like the RSCM Millennium Choir. That's led you to broadcasting. You were a prominent conductor for the BBC Songs of Praise and Radio 4's Daily Service. in a sense, that opened a door to a completely new type of music making.
Yeah, but I'd always conducted, when I was at Bowden, I conducted the Altrincham Choral Society, and they always worked with the Manchester Camerata. So I was conducting a very good orchestra in all those concerts. And I was richly blessed by the leader of that orchestra, Faye Campy, who taught me how to conduct those big shows. She taught me what was needed from the conductor. And that was very useful on Songs of Praise. When you had small orchestras or particularly brass groups, you knew what they needed. You knew where you needed to be clear. And you're doing all this stuff with the crowd. And that's got to be clear. But they also, the professionals actually need quite a lot of help. And you've got to have that rapport with them and be able to do that. So yeah, that all came together in that Songs of Praise stuff. But also, you have to remember, Mark, that although my father was a minister, in his holidays, he used to go on tour with Jimmy Shand and his band as compere and comedian. That ability to stand up in front of people and speak was something that I had from being very young. That didn't
So that's
frighten
from your
me.
dad. I mean,
Yes.
anybody who's been to your recitals, your concerts, you're known for getting up and engaging with the audience.
Yes.
I mean, that's very much a character of your style.
But that was my father.
So that's your father influencing
Yeah,
that.
very much so. And an expectation that you could do that.
I mean, in a way, if you weren't playing the organ, I kind of guess you would have needed something for an output where you could be that kind of charismatic showman side.
Well, I'm not sure I'd ever use charismatic, but the showman is very much
Well,
the
take
thing.
it now.
Yeah, I'll take it. You have to be, if you're going to go into a situation to do Songs of Praise with 500 singers, you've got to be larger than life. You've somehow got to get all these people working. I remember doing top 10 hymns from Bridgewater Hall, and we recorded in that one evening all the interviews and all the songs. 9 out of the 10 songs were recorded in that one evening. Well, if I'm absolutely honest, I was petrified before I went on. In the middle of it, something went wrong technically, and I ended up doing stand-up on the stage of the Bridgewater Hall for 15 minutes while they sorted out the technical problems.
But I mean, that is a real skill. But does that also inform your music? Because, of course, another thing that you're synonymous for is your work at Huddersfield Town Hall. You've been there for 30 years. That's very much, you've got to entertain the audience as well as play the organ.
You do, but you bring the same communication skill to your performance. The realisation all the time is that this is not for you. I mean, this was actually, interestingly, something Lionel Rogge said, and I always remember him saying it. He said, there are 3 lots of people involved in this. There's the audience, there's the composer, and there's you. And you're the bridge between the two. But in the performance, the only people who matter are the audience. This is all geared towards them. And if it's not, then do it in private in your own church. Don't pretend that that's performing. Performing is bringing this music and laying it out to those people. That's what I try to do.
So what do you think of the current style when you look at other organists, the way people are trying to entertain the troops, as it were, with organ recitals, the key to a good and engaging recital programme?
Well, I used to say to students at Cambridge, when I was very lucky because I ended up teaching the organ scholars a lot of the organ scholars at Cambridge. I would look at their recital programmes and say, is this some sort of teenage angst? Every piece in this programme is in a minor key, and so much great organ music. So many Bach's greatest works are in minor keys. But at some point, do you think we could have something when we let the sun into this and have something really bright in a major key? It would just make it more interesting.
But do you think this is maybe a phobia or a fear people have of thinking that if something is popular or accessible, therefore it has to be of a lower quality? Because that's what I was getting at with the town hall
I
side
think
of
much
thing.
less. I think much less now. And it's interesting, there's a very brilliant organist, I think he's German, he might be Austrian, who's just won the organ competition in Dublin.
Oh, Jan Lieberman.
Yeah.
Yes.
And if you look at his recital programme, he's playing the Concert Overture in C minor of Alfred Hollins in the middle of his programme. That comes as a surprising thing, because you would have thought that's town hall music. You wouldn't play that after Cole Evensong. And so I think that people like him are playing the kind of programme and bringing a youthful enthusiasm to it. And I think he will get a great following. He's also very good online. His programmes that he puts out online are extremely good, and it's quality playing.
So do you think there is perhaps then a generational divide? This is not necessarily people's attitude to music, whether it's popular and so, diminishing the organ or the profession or the repertoire, that you can actually look at this along generational lines. There's perhaps an older generation who would like things to be played and performed in a certain way, and there is an emerging younger repertoire that's really just taking on board the best stuff and they're playing what they like. I
think you're absolutely right. But I was always surprised at the town hall. There are certain pieces you've got to build up, and you've got to get them excited about the fact you're going to play it. And every few years I would play Liszt ad nos. Well, Liszt ad nos, Fantasie and Fugue ad nos, lasts just over 25 minutes. It's big, and in an hour-long programme.
It's half your recital.
It's half the recital. If you built that up, and if you explained to them why this is a piece that you particularly love, people would go out at the end, the way that people do after they've been to hear Messiaen Tarangalila. Their life has been somehow changed by experiencing this. This really mattered. This was not playing to the gallery. This was, although that expression I find offensive.
Really?
Sometimes we're accused. Don't you feel you're playing to the gallery? And I've never quite known what that means, because if they're in the gallery, they've paid to get in, and I don't see why they don't deserve the music that they like. But I also think that people would say, yeah, but your audience is quite old. Yes, well, I know that, but I don't quite see, people who are free on a Monday lunchtime to come to an organ recital will tend to be people who are retired. That's very likely. There were always a sprinkling of younger people and students. But also, I don't see why there shouldn't be music played for those people.
But this is this is why I keep talking about, the generational divide, or whether music is considered bad if it's popular. There is, and I wonder whether the organ is guilty of this, because perhaps it's so much associated in the church, and it is also surrounded by institution. There are organisations, there are associations around it. So it kind of has a prominence of being part of establishment. So I wonder, it's almost like the audience is sometimes criticised for liking the wrong piece of music, because they should be grateful for what they're given, because this is proper. Am I being too hard on that?
Yes.
Okay.
I think you're being unfair to the audience.
I'm talking about the organists.
If you spend your life accompanying services, and then you are then expected to become straight away a recitalist, I think that is a very difficult move to make. I think that what we do when you're playing concerts the whole time, you become a performer in a different way, in a way that would be out of place. You don't have that personality when you're accompanying Chorlebensong. That's not your job. That would be inappropriate. Often the kind of music that I would play in a concert would not be immediately what I would play at the end of Evensong. I don't think there's quite the gap that there is, but there is a unique repertoire for the town hall and the town hall kind of programme. And I think it's much more highly respected, because I think if you look like at Jan Lieberman playing Hollins, he recognises that Hollins was an extremely fine musician, and his greatest works, his finest works, are beautifully written.
When you listen to the things you've done, and I'm looking at the choral work, obviously you had a cathedral background, you were the organist at Manchester Cathedral and Blackburn Cathedral, you worked a lot with the BBC's Religion and Ethics Department, Songs of Praise, as you've been mentioning, and the work you did with young choirs, and a lot doing religious work. You are actually a religious person yourself, and I know you also do a lot of research into the works of Bach. You have a very analytical approach to his works. You take that seriously. Would I be right in thinking that another theme that informs your musical language and what it means to you is your faith?
Yes.
And is it coming from the music? When you play Bach, when you take Bach to bits, is that informing your faith, or is it your faith that you think allows you to access Bach?
I think it's the latter. I think it's my interest in where Bach was theologically and where the Lutheran Church at his time was, and it was changing. There were major changes going on. I think that allows me a way into, his works that you divide into basically into two, and there are the works based on chorales and the ones that are what we would call free. And for the chorales, I think an understanding of where they belong in his kind of theology and in that kind of liturgy really helps with that music. I don't think it's essential, and I think you don't have to believe it yourself, but I think you need to know that Bach believed it, in the same way that I really think you need to know about how Messiaen's faith was to understand his writing.
But that's an historical approach to the basically the biographical essence of that composer's religious faith. I wonder with you it's a little bit more, is when you're looking at whether Bach employs quotes from passions or oratorios or other examples that have a theological significance, even if it's relating to the crucifixion or whatever, or of sin or of hope, that actually you are feeling that, in a sense, in the music, which comes out in the performance, rather than just the sheer knowledge that that's what Bach wrote because he was a Lutheran.
I wish that were right, but I know too many performers very well and know that they are not people of faith at all, and their performances of Bach move me profoundly. So,
does that annoy you?
No, not at all. It delights me, because I think they're getting a glimpse of heaven through playing this glorious music, and I don't believe that it's only there for people who have some sort of Christian faith or for people who only have Christian faith to play. I think the music is just so wonderful that it will move you. But you might not know why it moves you, and it might not move you in a religious way at all, and I don't think that matters. And the more, I know you're saying I've been doing a lot of work, but I'm fascinated, more and more fascinated by Bach and his use of number and where he was in this progression of the church. I just find him fascinating. I find him more fascinating now than I did when I was a student. And I come back to big works. Every piece of Bach that I bring back into repertoire, I learn from a brand new copy now.
Why?
Because I just think I think of it all completely differently now. I don't want to have that fingering from then, because that's not how I phrase it anymore. I want to have a fresh approach to phrasing. And so it's all new.
Do you think you're different in the general professional career of the organist?
Well, I think I'm different in the cathedral world in that I had never been a boy in a choir. I'd never sung in a choir. I sang in school choirs and things, but I never sang in a church choir of that kind. So that was different. That I didn't find it all easy at the start. I wasn't a natural. I had to work very hard to be able to learn to play the organ. I had to work very hard at my technique. I had to completely rethink my pedal technique in my 20s. I just realised that, having met Nicholas Kinston and seen his Germani technique, that I needed to get Germani's exercises and do all that. I mean, I've worked really hard. But what it's allowed me to be is a very understanding teacher, because whatever problems students have, I'm able to say, yeah, I've been there, and what you need to do is this. And it's all based on all those things you talked about before, that strict work that allows you then the freedom to be the artist that can take great risks.
Is there something you didn't do and that you wish you had? Is there something, an achievement that you wish you had done?
No, because I just come to it from, maybe it's my Presbyterian background, but I just come to it from the point of view of, I just think I've been incredibly lucky to have had the kind of life I had when I didn't ever expect that. And it wasn't expected of me. And you must remember that when I was going off to study in Geneva, my father tried to persuade me not to go, because people like us don't do things like that. They thought I was getting ideas above my station. And
so they didn't support this?
No, not at all. No.
So it was hard work, literally, and you had to fight for it?
One of the members of staff from the Royal Northern went to Dundee to do some examining, and the steward there, who I thought was ancient when I was doing the piano exams there, but she was still there, and she asked this member of staff from the Royal Northern if she knew me, and she said, oh yes, I know Gordon very well. At this point, I was the head of the organ department at the Royal Northern and the organist of Manchester Cathedral. And this lady said, we all worry about Gordon. We wonder when he's going to get a proper job.
And when's that going to happen?
I think it's not going to happen now, Mark.
Gordon Stewart, thank you very much. well, perhaps time for me to get a proper job as well. As that's all from the Organ Podcast. Don't forget, you can relive the experience if you've missed any of the previous 19 episodes, which are all still available. But for the last time, from me, Mark O'Brien, goodbye.